I tried building a mini Elden Ring game with AI using vibe coding with Windsurf AI, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, Three.js, and React 3 Fiber. I have zero experience in game development, by the way, but I grew up playing games like this. Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and Dark Age of Camelot were some of my favorite games. Overall, I was surprised how far I was able to get vibe coding. However, it was pretty challenging and eventually became impossible to let AI vibe code 100% of it. By the way, you can play the game here. So go to viben-ring.vercel.app, or if you want to check out the open source repo, just go over here, Sabrina Ramonov, Viben Ring. So to start off the project, I started by creating a Next.js app with the templates. I knew I wanted to use React 3 Fiber to make this Elden Ring-esque game. The first step was just getting the environments, models, characters, basic animations down. So I imported models from Mixamo, and then I let the AI stitch everything together. This was the only free high-quality model with a sword, so that's why I used it. Basically, I had a global game state, which the AI was able to edit directly, but there were truly a lot of challenges. So, for example, dodging consumes stamina. Instead of using set stamina, AI would use the current value, which might already be outdated if you're dodging really quick. So, you as a player would dodge, but then stamina tracking would break because the code written by AI wasn't using a reliable previous value. And the challenges weren't limited to that. So, collision detection was also pretty hard to implement. At first, I wanted, Elden Ring style hit detection, where if I touch it with the tip of my sword, that should register a hit. Uh, it would have been great, but it was really hard to implement in practice. I eventually gave up on that and switched to a simpler system. You can kind of see it here. So if you click show debug mode in the top right corner, you'll kind of see like the shapes, the HP stats, the stamina stats. I'm going to click hide debug mode now. Basically, at the end of the animation, the code checks if the spheres collided, and that's my quote-unquote hitbox system. For the boss, this surprisingly worked. I told AI to just implement a behavior tree, and it actually did implement one with goals and stuff. A little bit overkill, but surprised that it worked, happy that it worked. Overall, though, AI would make lots of mistakes. So it would almost correctly suggest some edits, but sometimes it insert random things into the code. AI also struggled with understanding the size of the model. So when I placed a hitbox on the character, it didn't really know where the center was. It was easier to manually move the hitbox around until it looked right. Where we're standing is one of the 3D models I imported called Arena. And then beyond it is kind of like nature and mountains and stuff. I'll refresh the page so like you can kind of see the environment there, the trees, mountains over there. But yeah, once I started implementing more complex things like terrain, boss movements, other fancy stuff, the AI became pretty unpredictable in its coding output. It started mixing character logic and hitboxes of movement logic and attack into one mega component. And at some point, I just restarted the entire project because the AI just started combining everything into one massive file. And I noticed when a component grew beyond like, let's say 200, 250 lines, things became really unmanageable and unpredictable. So I would have to step in kind of like a senior developer and be really specific about what I wanted it to do, exactly what file it should put new code in. It's not as simple as saying like, just make this character, especially as like the code grew in complexity. The other annoying thing is like, as the code grows, like everything takes longer. For as long as possible, I tried to avoid reading the code, sit back and just watch Black Mirror and let it code. But then something would break. AI would leave behind like old placeholder code and think it was correct. So later code edits would reference that old placeholder code, and it would just mess things up. One time I updated the player animation and suddenly the trees in the environment started duplicating and re-rendering. Turns out there was a render loop tied to the animation logic, which re-triggered environmental renders with all sorts of new and random parameters. So when I started fresh the second time, I structured things a lot better. I made sure each piece has its own components. The character had its own hook, and just much more prescriptive around the architecture. But still, after like 5 or 10 features, AI would have a pretty tough time pushing through. Just in general, the more complex the code base is, the more AI has a tendency to introduce random bugs or hallucinate things. Another challenge was getting a hitbox to trigger at the right animation frame, so like right at the very end of the animation. But I had to eventually tell AI exactly what to do. So calculate the animation duration based on speed and frames, and then use a delay before checking the collision. Okay, you can see I'm dying here. I didn't love doing that because it was highly prescriptive, but I had tried like 8 times to let the AI do it and it wasn't working. Just in general, AI was not super great dealing with like side effects, delayed states. Some effects would fire multiple times unexpectedly. Overall, the code generated was often messy. Like I did spot a 5 level nested if statement somewhere, all sorts of unexpected side effects, unrelated components kept being tangled together, literally the visualization of spaghetti code. But overall, the biggest learning and takeaway is that you definitely still need to read, review, understand the code, test it out. And it's really not as simple as like, hey, AI, just code this game. Yeah, as the code base grew larger, the generation time was really painful. I mean, sometimes it would take 15, 20 minutes for Claude 3.7, the reasoning model, to finish running. So I'd literally just be watching TV for that period of time, forget what's going on, have to reread things. And, you're hopeful because, like, when initially it says its thought process, it sounds like it's going to fix stuff, but it almost never fixed the thing I asked it to. And even worse, like, sometimes AI would repeat the exact same approach that already failed, which just made debugging like really frustrating and consume a lot of time. Like sometimes I'd look at the clock and somehow an hour would pass by with zero progress, which kind of killed the vibe. If I had better architecture from the beginning, like the character, environment, boss logic, everything, then maybe I wouldn't have had to restart the entire project. But that kind of defeats the purpose of using AI to do it for me, right? And the game logic itself is pretty simple. I mean, the player moves. Okay, we can dodge, we can swing a sword to attack. The boss moves towards me, then swipes his big sword. And if I die, which you can tell from the green HP bar up there, the game ends. It looks cool because I've imported like these 3D assets and stuff, but the game logic itself is pretty basic, all things considered. In the end, vibe coding it was really fun to see what's possible. Again, I don't have any experience in game development or anything. It's really cool that this is even possible in browser with Three.js, right? But ultimately, the code conceptually made sense, but a lot of spaghetti, a lot of effort spent kind of untangling it and reasoning about what's going on. So you really can't just tell AI to make this game without understanding what it's doing. There's still a level of like technical expertise required to direct the project successfully or architect the project successfully. And very quickly, you kind of feel the pain of that. So when you lose understanding of what's going on in the code, then every new feature you try to add takes so much longer if you don't know like what's actually going on in the code base. So I do think AI for code generation is still really, really useful. It's probably like I think it can handle 30%, 40% of the work. For example, scaffolding, UI, boilerplate code, testing was really great for that too. But for core game logic or more complex features, you as a senior developer really needs to be the one driving the project and architecture. So yeah, I have open sourced this. So if anybody wants to contribute and take it to the next level, definitely feel free to. I was still pretty impressed though overall that you can build this in browser in Three.js, basically in my spare time with zero game development experience. It would be really cool to take this further. I've been wondering if like using ballistics, shooting at each other would have made the fighting experience like a little more interesting. Overall, just a really cool and fun vibe coding project to experiment with.